seconds. All right, we are live.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome, Nikki. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. Middle of the week. Exactly the middle of the week if you're on the East Coast. It's noon, so we're coming over the hill. Weekend is in sight. And if you're Nikki in the UK, you are just a couple steps closer.
Yeah, almost end of day. Or if you are Europe, you are end of day. So congratulations to anybody in Europe right now.
And if you're on the West Coast, then
well, let's not talk about that. Yeah. Congratulations.
Start your day off.
Yeah.
Exactly. For waking up. That's the first big accomplishment of the day.
Oh yeah, we have a San Francisco. So yay.
Oh, I lost you for a second, but I'm back.
Oh,
now.
Are you back? You are back. We
Yes.
can hear you. All good.
Great.
Oh, we have a quiet sob from Seattle. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, welcome everyone. We'll just wait another couple minutes for folks to trickle in on this fine day. Got people all over the map.
Yeah. Oh, fellow UKers. And there's all important coffee.
Mm-hmm. Have mine. Second of the day.
Oh, Talia, I'm going to Colorado in March. I can't wait. I can be in Denver. So pumped. So pumped.
Gonna get some skiing in? Some mountains?
No, I'm visiting my best friend. She lives in Denver. So we are not going to be able to do any skiing, but I will be skiing in January. So nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Best part of winter.
Yeah. The only thing after January, I'm like, this is done now, right?
100%.
Benjamin, yes, this will be recorded. So don't worry about it. Will be recorded and sent to you.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we can get started maybe with some intros and some welcomes, and then kick it over to Nikki. But thank you everyone for joining us. Really excited to be here today. We have a very special guest, very important conversation and discussion on stakeholders, a really key piece of all of our roles, whether we're in research ops, product design, or not. Any role at any company needs collaboration and needs stakeholder management to get things done. And we're really excited to be joined by an expert, Nikki here. For those that I have not yet met, my name is Oren. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO here at Rally, and we have been building a user research CRM for the better half of 4 years now, with the express goal of making it easier for research teams and their stakeholders to connect with your own real users. So really dialed in and focused on recruitment and participant management, building a best-in-class platform to support large global collaborative teams. And with that, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping to explain kind of what you should expect here for the next hour or so. If this is your first time, in contrast, it's a really great tool for webinars. So you'll be able to interact in the chat. Please don't be shy. Feel free to leave your comments throughout, your reflections, drop any questions there. And we'll be taking those questions throughout the conversation, and we'll have some dedicated Q&A time as well. Love it when these sessions are dynamic and active. The session will be recorded, and we'll be sharing it after the event by email as well. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Nikki.
Thank you so much, Oren. I really appreciate it. And we will be hearing from you again soon when we pull you back in for a few questions of my own. It's really nice because I never get to ask the questions really in these settings. But hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Nikki. I'm going to be chatting with you today about our all infamous stakeholders. and how to get a little bit more buy-in from them. And these are all strategies that I have used in the past, but I also currently still use with my clients, because I am also a consultant and an advisor for user research. So I am still doing all the research things and having to wrangle my stakeholders like a herd of cats. So we will be talking through some really awesome tactics for the next hour. And as I said, or as Oren mentioned, please post questions in the chat. They will be flagged. We also had some questions rolling in beforehand, and I promise I will leave time to answer as many as I possibly can. But let's get started, because I am really, really excited to talk through this particular model that I love to use when it comes to stakeholders. So a big thing for me is when I started as a user researcher, about 12 years ago now, which is a scary fact, I had a really hard time finding like actual concrete steps of how to do things. And so today, what I want to share with you are actual things that I do in my day-to-day in order to help me get more buy-in from stakeholders and to help me make research impossible for them to ignore, or as impossible as possible for them to ignore. So I'm really excited to share this framework with you, because it's something that I've worked on myself and have tested on my own stakeholders, and also people that I mentor and coach. I have given them this model as well, and they have used it to great amounts of success. So I'm really, really thrilled. And there is something else at the end that I'm going to chat to you about, which is a little template that you will be able to get as well. That also helps you with writing and working through all of these different steps. So let's dive in to what I am calling the 5-step influence shift. I hate coming up with titles for things, ever so creative. But yeah, let's talk through the different steps, and we will go step by step, and I will go into detail for each step. But the first step that we're going to look at is identifying real decision makers. The second step is decoding their drivers. The third is predicting their resistances. Fourth is planting early micro commitments. And the fifth step is making alignment unforgettable. And again, plus time for questions at the end. We're going to go through each of these 5 steps, and I'm really, really excited to talk you through this. So really quickly, before we dive into these, when to actually use this framework, and it will become more and more clear as we go through all the steps, but just to kind of ground you in when you can use this 5-step influence shift is both before projects and during and after projects. So one of the best things and one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give people is when you join an organization, it's the perfect time to look at this kind of framework and to dig into this kind of framework. But don't worry, if you've been at your organization a while and you haven't done these steps, now is the perfect time to do them. And I like to do them every quarter or so. Another great time is when you get a research project request and before you kick off a research project. During and after projects as well. Ideally, you're doing this before projects. That is the ideal for everything, is that we are doing everything up front. And in retrospect, it seems so obvious, but even if you're not doing this up front, you can still do it during and after your projects. So while planning for your project, before presenting your study, so before presenting your results, and then finally when creating your presentation to know exactly what to include. Because I don't know about you, but there were many, many times where after a research project, I sat down and I said, what should I be putting in this report? And that is one of the scariest questions that we have to ask ourselves as researchers. And I'm hoping that this framework will also help you with that. So one thing that I just wanted to do is we have a really cool poll capability in here. So I'm going to actually start the first poll and bring it up. And I'm just curious what your biggest challenge when working with stakeholders is. I'll just give everybody a few seconds. Cool. Oh, we've got like a pretty even, constant scope or priority changes is pulling ahead. Great.
It's like watching a horse race.
I know, right? I'm like, which is gonna win? But this is awesome, just to showcase. I'm I know how you feel. It can be very frustrating when things change quite a lot. I grew up as a solo user researcher in startups, so it was constantly changing, with the scope, with the priorities, either getting bigger, getting smaller, just completely disappearing. So I totally feel you on that, and I'm hoping that this will really help. This framework will really help with those priority and scope changes, so that you can constantly be like micro pivoting with your organization. And this will also help with connecting research to business as well. Great. So I am going to go ahead and remove that from the screen, and I'm going to stop the poll just to make sure that we're all good. Awesome. So let's get started with the first topic here, the first step, which is identifying the real decision makers. So something that I used to do is spend hours updating a colleague, getting feedback from them on a project, only to find out that they didn't have the final say or any real control over the project. So I would talk to a particular person and they would be like, yeah, we would love to do this research. I think it's a great idea. Let's go ahead and do it. And I'd be like, yay, somebody wants to do this with me. Okay. And then I would like make the plan and I would share it with them. We would iterate on it. And then suddenly this happened to me a lot, at least in the beginning, with like designers. We would get like going and like get super excited. Everything would be planned. We would spend a lot of time on this. And then our stakeholder, like a product manager, might be like, oh no, we don't have scope for that. We don't have time for that. We don't have budget for that. Actually, this is changing. You got everything wrong. I had a stakeholder tell me that once and I was really sad. So I used to do this, and then that got extremely frustrating to constantly feel like I was getting buy-in, but maybe from the wrong people. And so that's when I switched over to something called influence web mapping. And so what I am going to walk you through right now is a few steps that I like to take. And then I'm going to bring Oren back in to get his perspective as a non-researcher on how to find influencers sounds kind of weird given Instagram now, but how to find influential people at your company from a different perspective. But really quickly, to go over influence web mapping and what that actually looks like, is the first one is to start with the person that you're in contact with and ask who else will need to be looped in before we can move forward. So this is something that I failed to do over and over again. I never really sat down and said, okay, this person who has come to me with this research request, who else are they connected to? And how will that impact the research project potentially going ahead, potentially getting budget or not, being scoped down maybe, or being changed completely. So what I started to do was kind of ask different people who I was talking to who were a little bit more bought in. I'm like, who would sign off on this work, or who would be most excited or concerned about these findings? Who else would use this information? Who's giving final calls for things? Who does this person check with before making a big decision? And not only did this help me with like making these connections, I literally like drew like little mind maps of connections of people and how they were connected to each other and who had, I hate to say more influence because hierarchical structures suck, but they are really true in our life. So who had like the top influence that might impact whether or not research would go through. So not only did it help me with that, but then I started to realize all of the important people that I should be talking to if I wanted to go up in my career. And that opened the door for me to understand who else I should be talking to and trying to understand them more. And then the second step is to write down both the formal authority, so the person who will sign off, and the informal influence, so the person that this person will listen to. And I have some examples that I just wanted to bring up on like how to make a stakeholder profile. So you can kind of use this if you want to take a screenshot of it, but you will also be directed towards an amazing template later. But what I did is I made these stakeholder profiles where I wrote down people's influence levels, their decision style, their drivers, their relationships. And as an example here, we have Alex, who's head of sales, has high influence, has a political style, is a speed driver, and has I have a neutral relationship, or they have a neutral relationship with me and research. Right. So this is a really great way just to jot down who your stakeholders are and what they are interested in. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into like decoding their drivers. So we'll go a little bit more into depth with what those mean, so that you are able to understand that quite easily. And then what is ideal is creating that web. So you're looking through that web of your stakeholders, and you're calling out who are those big decision makers who own the budget and scope, who are some indirect influencers that you can trust or that other people trust. So I once had a level of stakeholders who hated research, but then above them was a VP who loved research. And so I was like, let's skip to the good part. And I went above that layer, and I was able to talk to him, and they trusted him. And that helped me with gathering that buy-in. And then we also want to identify gatekeepers. So these are people who block access. And then what you kind of can do is create that influence web, and try and understand who is the most direct decision maker, who is the most indirect one, and what is one gatekeeper. So these are really, really great techniques just to get your head around what it is that you're like, who are you talking to, and what kind of influence do they have in that organization. And we will talk a little bit about more how to find people's drivers as well in just a second. But first, Oren, I would love to bring you into this conversation because I would like to get your perspective, because I have one, and I always like to pick out some more. So I'm curious, like from your perspective, like how do you pick out who is the main decision maker or the main particular person with influence?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm listening to you talk and reading the framework that you're sharing, the striking parallels that I see are actually between how we try and interact with our prospective customers and our clients. The similarities between sales and what salespeople do, and researchers, what they need to do within organizations to drive influence and decision making, are extremely similar, actually. Starting with definitely identifying, who has the power to actually sign a contract and buy. But it's not just about isolating that person and going directly to them behind everyone else's back. It's really about the web that you create between the individual end user, in our instance, the researcher, the research ops individual whose day-to-day is going to be influenced by our product, and who's has the personal vested interest in securing the platform, and how do we help them tell the story to their leadership team, to the budget holder, to the final decision maker, on why to purchase a new software, why to go through a very lengthy procurement process in order to make a change in the way they do things. And ultimately, it comes down to figuring out with your stakeholders, so with our day-to-day champions, the researchers, research ops folks, who are those decision makers, and really partnering, collaborating together to build business cases to understand what motivates them, what drives them, what KPIs they care about, and helping to tell the story together.
Yeah, I love that. It's not just about like skipping ahead, but really cultivating that relationship from the bottom up. And yeah, I hugely appreciate that, because I think it's important for everybody to be able to tell a cohesive narrative from the bottom up, so that it does come through as very, important and valuable. And I'm curious, because you had mentioned a bit about, what motivates them. So from your side, how do you find out what motivates these decision makers to actually make decisions? And how do you work with like maybe the non decision maker with helping them to understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's more challenging than others when you don't necessarily have direct access to that final decision maker. But very frequently, their motivations can be one of two things. There's, I think, personal motivations, and then there's kind of organizational drivers, or KPIs that they're on the hook for when it comes to the day-to-day job that the leader holds. So what we always encourage our stakeholders to do is leverage their strengths, which is discovery, which is asking questions, which is trying to figure out internally what are the biggest organizational goals. Is it improving NPS? Is it improving time to market? Is it beating some certain competitor? Is it reducing churn? Because usually the biggest organizational goals that the company is focused on trickle down to the senior leadership, and that is how they make decisions on a day-to-day basis about what to prioritize and what to buy, what to invest in, where to spend their time and energy and resources. So as a researcher, using your investigative skills to figure out what the company cares most about from the top levels down, and then using kind of discovery methodologies to ask directly about what these individuals really care about.
Yeah. I think as researchers, we can sometimes forget that we have that amazing skill because we use it so externally facing. We use it for customers, whereas like I know that for a really long time in my career, I just didn't utilize that skill with my stakeholders. And so I lost so much context and I lost so many moments where I could have dug really deeply into like their personal and organizational goals to help me relate back to them in a really empathetic way. So I'm super pumped that you brought up like that discovery methodology should be, heavily utilized with your stakeholders.
100%. Yeah, and there's so many benefits to it beyond just the learning. There's also the credibility building that you gain from asking really good questions. There's the personal relationship building that happens as well. So I think it's just a really powerful tool to use all around.
Yeah, amazing. And I did have one last question because as researchers, we deal with skepticism a lot, and we deal with skeptical stakeholders. So I'm curious, like, how do you speak with a decision maker who might be like skeptical about either how you can help them or just speaking with you in general, just like not believing in what you have to offer them?
hmm Yeah, absolutely. Always a tricky situation. And I think when encountering skepticism, the first thing I try to do is dig and try and figure out the why. What's underlying that skepticism? Did they have a negative experience in the past? Are they focused on something else? Did they maybe misunderstand something that you shared or communicated? So I think it always comes down to digging into the why first and foremost. And then you have kind of all those stones turned, and you can figure out how to address that head on, whether it's credibility that you can bring from another decision that you help drive in another part of the company that you can help surface to them, or some unknown that was uncovered. So I think it's starting with the why when you encounter that skepticism.
Amazing. Thank you. Anything else that you wanted to add that I maybe didn't ask you?
No, I think the last thing about stakeholders is I think it's really the key for any great researcher, research ops individual to drive and spread their influence, and view stakeholder relationships as kind of a learning ground, and as a way to kind of enhance your own personal skill set of how to navigate these complex organizational environments that we all find ourselves in, especially in large companies. So I think the opportunity to work with stakeholders is a gift, and can learn something from each one.
I love that. The opportunity to work with stakeholders is a gift. I feel like we need that on a t-shirt or a sticker, and every researcher needs to get it and like put it somewhere that they can see every single day. Because I don't think that we've
Done.
got those vibes.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Oren. I really appreciate you giving us your perspective because it's so important to like understand, like as researchers, we're not the only one who are like searching and scrambling for people who have influence. Like it is across an entire organization in every department. And I think it's
Yeah.
important for us to realize that it's not just us who are trying to like kind of get through that wall, and that you can also talk to your other colleagues about this and about how they do it, because how nice would it be to sit down with like a salesperson and say, well, actually, how do you do this when it comes to sales calls or when it comes to whatever it is, or customer support or anybody? So that's another really great tip, is to sit down with your colleagues too.
100%. Yeah.
Cool. Lauren, well, thank you so much. I really, really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah.
We are going to head to our next step today, which is decoding drivers. So I saw a few people ask, how do you actually go about decoding drivers? And I want to walk through the strategies that I use, and they are going to echo what Oren said, which is a lot of question asking. But the things that I tend to see are 3 layers of drivers. So you have performance drivers, you have political drivers, and you have personal drivers. And we have this ourselves. So it might be a really great opportunity for you to take a step back and think about your actual drivers as well. Because the more that you understand that, the more you can understand how other people might also have that as well. So it's really interesting for us to take a step back and empathize using our own kind of experience, as well as looking out and understanding other people's experiences. So performance drivers are really, really like work driven. So what are you actually measured on? So what are the things that when it comes to this person's performance review, or whether or not they might be laid off, whether or not they're going to get a raise or a promotion, whether or not they get called out for doing something really awesome. That's what they're actually measured on, and what do they care about when it comes to that. So what are the things that are keeping them up at night, where they're like, uh-oh, we haven't hit this OKR, we haven't hit this KPI. Political drivers are who they report to, and want to impress. So these are like the politics of a company. So do they want a promotion? Do they want recognition? Right? So what are they navigating politically in an organization? This can also be like, who do your colleagues get along with and also not get along with, and what do those relationships show? And then finally, we have personal drivers. So what do they want to be known for personally? Do they want to be the person who is like super efficient and speedy? Do they want to be the person who's like the innovator, the creative? Do they want to be the person who people go to for certainty or for control over a situation, like problem solving? So these are the layers of drivers that I tend to see whenever I do a lot of this work with my stakeholders. And ideally, we're kind of looking at all 3, but it is still important to, if you're feeling overwhelmed with all 3, kind of trying to identify which one might be the most important for people, and you can hone in on that. So essentially, to uncover them, we want to identify their performance goals. So the metrics that they're measured on. We want to identify their boss's priorities. So this would be the political driver. So what they would get rewarded for. And we want to identify their recognition goals. So how they want to be seen internally. And if you see these kinds of statements, so identify people's goals, identify people's priorities, these look kind of familiar to, they're a little bit not written in the best way, but they look familiar as research goals, right? So what I would actually recommend you doing is sitting back, and I have done this, to be completely honest. I've done this where I've sat back and I've done a research plan on my stakeholders. So, and I went full-fledged. It was a little bit cuckoo, but I had to push myself to do it. And I wrote through how I would identify their performance goals, how I would, discover what their unmet needs are, what their fears are, what their personal goals are. Because if you again take a step back, as like an individual, when I was working full-time in an organization, and even as working as a consultant now, it's very, very important to me that I hit performance goals, because if I don't hit those performance goals, people aren't going to recommend me. Right, that I'm not going to get new projects. I'm not going to get a good review, as well as I will not get any sort of like recognition. And then I would then also not be somebody that people would go to for research consultancy. And all of those are my performance, their priorities, their performance, political and personal to me. So also take a step back and try to uncover these for yourself. But I did want to give some prompting questions. So if this project is successful, what will they brag about their boss to? What would help them get promoted or publicly recognized? And what would make them look bad if something failed? So these are questions to ask yourself, but I really, really highly recommend that you go out to your stakeholders and you ask them, hey, if this project is successful, what would that look like? Right? Hey, how could I help you with a particular goal you're trying to achieve? Or what is a goal that you are trying to achieve? What are you trying your hardest to achieve? Right? What could happen if this failed? How could we de-risk this? Right? So those kinds of questions will help you get at those different layers, so that you can start asking them and pulling apart, okay, do they care a lot more about performance, or do they care about like the more personal side of things, or do they care about like the political side? So for example, let me show this example first. So you have this framework. So we have the performance goals, the boss's priority, and the recognition. So we have the KPI of feature adoption. This person's boss is a VP of product who wants to put retention up, and they get recognition. They want credit for fixing an onboarding drop off. So some of the questions that you could ask is, what's the one metric you're most focused on right now when you report to your boss? What's the thing that they want to or need to hear? If this project worked out, what would be a personal win for you? So you might not know people's KPIs. So I recommend also feeling free to ask them, hey, what are the team's goals? Or what are your goals that you're being measured on? And talking through this kind of information. So for example, I have worked with a lot of product managers. Those are my main stakeholders. And I always go in and I always ask them and get really clear on like, what is it that they're trying to achieve? Like, what is the team's goals? What would get them rewarded at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the half year, or at the end of the year, whatever they kind of utilize in terms of like timing? What would get them like rewarded? What would, if a PM was like, oh yeah, like, the VP of product would be so thrilled if we could do X, Y, or Z. Right. And so it's really important to kind of talk through this, because what this gives you an understanding of is, okay, this is what this person cares about. And a lot of the times when research lands flat, it's because we haven't taken a second to realize what's important to the people that we're talking to and presenting to. So any time that my research has been completely flat and like not well regarded is because I completely forgot to the context of my audience and what they cared about and what related back to them. So what I would recommend is to pick a stakeholder and write down this information, or go about and ask them this kind of information. I do recommend doing it with a stakeholder that you are more comfortable with, and not starting with the one that you are least comfortable with and working your way up. Because I know that I've struggled too. I know that it can be kind of hard working with stakeholders. So try and first work with somebody, or practice on a colleague if you're not feeling comfortable and confident. But I do recommend just trying to get this information out. And then we are going to look at next is predicting their resistances. So we all have encountered stakeholder pushback. We know it's coming before it's coming. Like, it's always there. It's always in the background. And so I was sick of kind of sitting in meetings and being like, not this again, not this again, not this again. And kind of going into meetings almost like anticipating and nervous about pushback. So what I started to do was kind of anticipating this and sitting down and saying, okay, listing out any objections that I think will happen, either from a research study or a presentation. And then I would link them to an underlying fear or constraint, because that's where all of the pushback normally comes from, fear. And then I would prepare a reframe that aligns with their driver. So I have kind of done some research on the most common pushbacks, and I've also put in here what some reframes are. But I am not sure if any of you have already seen these kinds of quotes before. Actually, I do have I will start a quick poll, if you all don't mind, to humor me. What's the most common objection that you hear when proposing research? Yeah, we don't have time. I'll get back to you. Oh, this is a proper horse race here. Yeah, nobody has time, do they? sadly. Yeah, it's not a priority. Cool. Yeah, it's looking like the top ones are we don't have time and it's not a priority, which, you know, it's hard. I used to get really angry at my stakeholders. And I try not to get as angry about that at them anymore because, you know, just like we have a whole host of things that we're trying to achieve so that we get recognition, so that we get a promotion, so that we get a pay rise, so that we get job security, they're also doing that as well. And oftentimes, you know, it's hard for us to understand. Research is not the number one thing on their mind. I don't understand that sometimes, but it is true. So we do have to take this into consideration and at least try and work with them to the best of our ability. So thank you all so much for hearing me with that poll. So I have come up with these like common pushbacks of we already know this, we don't have time, it's not a priority. And I've tried to kind of think through what this means. So the already know this is the fear of wasted effort. We don't have time is there's a perceived delay. So something will slow us down. This isn't a priority means that I have done a bad job linking research to their goals. We need to test the solution. They want validation. They don't want to uncover more problems because who would? And I'll get back to you is some sort of avoidance or overload. And so we want to try and minimize the amount that they are having to deal with. And I'm more than happy to go into more detail with the questions if you have any particular ones for this. But I'm really hoping that these reframes will help. But a lot of what I would recommend is as much as you can. I know that it might be frustrating is parallel based research. So whenever somebody says that they don't have time, say, oh, okay, let's run this in parallel with what we're working on then. Because with we don't have time, you can still run research. And there have been a lot of times where I have run research in parallel to while we're building something, because they said that we didn't have time for research, and the research has uncovered something that was so massive that we had to then go back and fix it. And that was actually a really, really nice case study to showcase, hey, we should do research beforehand, right? So it's okay to try and run quick in parallel research as well. So for me, what I like to do is acknowledge their concern, link to their driver from step 2. So what their driver was, and show how your approach helps them achieve that drive faster or with less risk, right? So we don't have time for research. We're looking at safety or risk avoidance. I get that the deadline is tight. Running this in parallel will protect the launch from unexpected issues and save us from painful rework after it's out. So I hope that that's helpful in just showing that you can really reframe these things. And here's a nice formula where it's the acknowledge, the link to driver, and try your best to show them a win. Right. And make sure that win is not about, sadly, not about the user. It can be about the user, but also about something that's important to them. So some sort of performance, some sort of personal driver, some sort of political driver. The next step is to plant early micro commitments. So this is a little bit of a next step in terms of trying to get them stuck into something in the best way possible. So what I recommend doing here is identifying the easy yes. So something that they can agree to without hesitation or risk. And this is why smaller studies can sometimes be very helpful. Make the ask specific and time bound. So for instance, can you give me one metric you'd love to see improve, right? So this is like something that helps you get really down into what they want versus, oh, do you have any feedback? I used to do that all the time. Do you have any feedback on this research plan? Oh, do you have any research that you need done? That's not helpful because people probably won't be able to come to you with that. Or they might be able to, but it might be like, yeah, run this survey for us. So I try to make the ask very, very specific and time bound and get the easiest yeses possible. And then I always try and close the loop by showing how their input shaped the project. So I will always say like something like, oh, thank you so much for this person, for Joe, who had mentioned this, and now we're going to do this amazing project, or we got these amazing insights. So that's always very helpful in kind of getting people in. And I think that the most important part is getting really specific in your asks. So some prompts that you can use on yourself is what's the one thing the stakeholder can do in under 5 minutes that helps this project. So it might be pointing to a particular KPI that they've been obsessed with, or it might be pointing to a question that their boss has asked them over and over and over again. What's an opinion, data point, or resource they could give you early? So any access to any data that can help move the project forward, so that when it comes to the presentation, you're not just sitting there saying 5 users said this, and everybody's saying 5 users. You might have data earlier on so that you can triangulate that and get ahead of that pushback. Who could they introduce you to who would strengthen the project? So I always ask people to introduce me to either like customer support or data analytics or product analytics, the marketing team even. So who else might have information? And then how could you publicly acknowledge their contribution so they feel ownership? Just make sure that before you openly say yay to somebody, just make sure that they want you to say yay publicly, because some people don't like public recognition. So always ask that ahead of time. So to log micro commitment, this is the framework that I use. Small is suggesting a metric or asking a question or adding a question. Medium is intro to teammate or joining a kickoff for another team or for another project that's related. And then large is co-presenting or being a champion of research. So these are some scripts that you can use as well. And what I would recommend you do is, for a project, really like diving into any sort of micro commitment that you could find to showcase like how that person helped you with the project, because we should be celebrating stakeholders, not disliking them as much as possible. And then the final step for today, I just want to make sure that we get to plenty of questions, is to make alignment unforgettable. So what I tend to do is make an agreement tracker. This is a little bit intense, I must say, but I have to, especially in consultancy, I have to do it. So recording agreements immediately after they happen and including the context so people understand why the decision was made, sharing a recap within 24 hours, and then surfacing agreements before milestones to remind people what was decided. And I'm going to show a quick example of this here. So like, what was the agreement that was made? Who else needs to see this agreement for it to stick? So whenever I have a PM who might come to me and say, okay, yeah, we agree to do, 12 interviews, I always log that. Because it is important, because I will always get pushback from somebody somewhere that we don't have to do 12. We don't have time, we don't have budget. And it just helps with saying, well, this is what we agreed on and we've already scoped it for this. And then you can also see here, focus on mobile onboarding only. I've had this helps with scope creep in projects. So, and it can try and help with constantly shifting priorities. But if you are one of those people that is constantly shifting priorities, having a log like this, an agreement log, is really helpful in showcasing to either your manager or somebody else that you trust that so many things are shifting constantly, which then make it hard for anything to get done properly. So we've had all these agreements and they've all changed. And I actually did a thing with my manager where I showcased the number of changes that were made for scope in a quarter over projects. And he was like, uh-oh, this is a big problem. And we actually were able to rise that up to leadership. And we were like, okay, we need to get better at planning. So that's something as well that you can use. And this is my framework for tracking an agreement. So the what, when, who is present in the context. And I would hugely recommend. I like to do a lot of retrospective work on my projects. So you could take all 5 of these steps and apply them to previous projects to get more comfy with this kind of framework. But I really, really do recommend like retrospectively looking, okay, like where decisions shifted, where like maybe an agreement was made that was changed, and like logging it and the context and who was present could have maybe helped you with, it's that whole thing of like, oh, we don't anymore have time for budget for 12 people, and you're like, okay, but this is what we agreed upon, so like everything would have to change, or we go ahead with this. And it just helps to remind people like, oh, we actually did scope for this, we did say yes to this, we should be able to move forward with it. So I know that I breezed right through those 5 steps really quickly, but I do want to say that we have this amazing canvas that is called the Influence Tracker Canvas. And it is, I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head how many pages it is, but it's a lot of pages. And it's essentially these thoughts digested down into a PDF that you can use, that has steps if you wanted to print it out and write stuff down, if you just wanted to, utilize it as a guide. It has all of this condensed into like a text kind of visual format for you to go through and start utilizing all of these different steps so that you can apply them to your work like immediately. And that's kind of what I really, really recommend doing in terms of your next step, is reviewing weekly, review this weekly to update like any sort of drivers and pushbacks and commitments. Prep for meetings by rehearsing reframes. So under the stakeholder profile that I shared earlier on, which is again going to be in that canvas, you can put back like their common pushbacks. That's something else that you can do so that going into it what they will commonly push back on. And then again, just track patterns across projects. Go into this with a very, very like intense researcher mindset, and try and like, it helps you take a step back a little bit from being as subjective, because sometimes our feelings can get very highly involved with this. So definitely what I would recommend doing is take a step back and like track these projects and see, okay, that stakeholder, I think it's this kind of driver. They care about these performance metrics. In the past, how have I failed to actually like relate that back to them? What has their pushback been? And kind of like go back and like see any patterns and trends with your stakeholders. And that will help you to then kind of reframe how you're dealing with their pushback, and make sure that you're presenting research in a way that always ties back to what they care about. So I'm going to stop talking for the time being and read some questions that have come up. There were quite a few that came up before from the pre-registration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some of those and then go over to the live questions as well. So the first question that we have here. So how can you ensure stakeholder buy-in when user research results are unexpected and point to major changes that are still unclear? So this is something that comes up a whole lot in terms of like, okay, how do we deal with research results that are either unexpected or negative? And I saw somebody had a question about negative research results as well. So something that I would recommend doing is that this is hard to do, but research is factual. And what I recommend doing whenever I've had stakeholders who might be upset about the research findings, 2 things. The first thing is I sit down with them before the share out. If there is something that was glaringly terrible, I will always sit down with my PM and potentially my designer, depending on that relationship. But I will ask the designer to come and I will tell them what I'm finding before, if they're not included in the sessions and they don't know, before I go ahead and share it out with the world, because I didn't do that once and it was extremely detrimental to some of the relationships that I had with stakeholders. So I always pull people in beforehand. So if your research results are unexpected and there are like major changes or a lot of negativity that's really like not feeling great, always pull them in beforehand. And because you have done that, or at least I found, because I have done that and I've pulled them in, and I will literally say, I'm pulling you into this because this feedback came back and I don't want to share it widely with the organization before I share it with you, because it makes sense. Like imagine being in those shoes. So what would happen if if one of your PMs looked through all of your interviews and then pulled out all of the horrible clips of you asking leading biased questions and of you like messing up the interview, and then presented them to the organization and was like, uh-oh, like, look at all these bad things that this person is doing, right? It's like a similar vibe. So I try really hard to share these with the stakeholders beforehand. And then I ask them like, hey, what is it that you want to do in this situation? And I always say I always remind them, this has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with like the work. This is just the factual feedback that we're getting from people. And we need to address this feedback, because if we continue to get this feedback, it's only going to get worse, right? So things like retention, things like acquisition, those really important metrics and KPIs that these people care about will continue to drop, and satisfaction will continue to drop. So we do need to address this, but how do we want to address this with the wider organization in the best way that is respectful? So that's usually what I do, is I will go and share that with them beforehand. And like, I'm going to say something slightly controversial maybe here, but like, there is only so much you can do, because you are not, usually as a researcher, you are not a decision maker, right? So you do need to like think about how you can present this information in the best way possible. If people decide not to go forward with it, you don't just sit there and bang your head against the wall, because sometimes that's what is the case. And in those situations, you have a few different options. The first one is to move along and try and work with teams who do listen to research and who do make changes. The second one is to start looking for a new job, potentially with a team, or moving to a team who cares more about research, generally speaking. And the third one is to use it as potentially a case study of, I did say, these things would happen, and they have. I think that next time this is a call to us doing research. So I hope that is helpful. I'm just going to pop into the Q&A. We got a lot of stuff on this one, so a lot of emojis. Yeah, okay, so it is similar. But I do want to talk to the first part of it. So how do you handle stakeholders who want research only to affirm a bias they have or to validate a project they are on? Yeah. So this is, I call this out. So I, for instance, will never use the word validate. If my stakeholders come to me and they say, we want to validate this solution, I will say, I cannot do that. I can evaluate how the solution is, and I can evaluate people's mental models. But I cannot tell you that people will absolutely love this, or that people do absolutely love this, because that's not what user research is anyways. User research is not there to say, yay, everybody's going to love this, or no, everybody's going to hate this, or everybody's going to pay that amount of money, or everybody's going to use this, or everybody loves this more than this version more than that version. So usually this has to do with a few different things. So the first one is a misunderstanding of what research is. So I try and explain what research can actually do, and it's a part of the puzzle. Just like you can't sit down and look at quant data and know everything, you can't sit down with qual data and know everything either. And the second thing is, this is where I turn into a researcher on the internal stakeholder side, and I will ask them literally like, why? So, for instance, in the past, I've had a lot of stakeholders who have come to me and they've been like, hey, we have this solution. We just need to know how much people like it. And I will say, like, I will question, how do you know this was the right solution? Where did this solution come from? Why do you think people will like it? Like, what is the data behind it? What will happen if people, and I kind of say, what will happen if people don't like it? And I have been told not to run research before because of that. And I have had to just like put my hands up and say, I think we should run research. But again, I think part of maturing in your career is also remembering like you won't be able to fix and make everything perfect as a researcher. So I try and really like pull apart what they're trying to understand, and then I try and pull apart the underlying fear. So obviously, if somebody has been working on something and they see negative results, it's really sad. Like I know a lot of product managers and designers who I was close with, who had the best idea, right? Very excited about it, and then it flopped, and it just like it really hurts people. And so I think also reminding yourself that they're probably operating from that space of fear, both personally and publicly, and trying to like understand that and say, hey, you know, what can we do? Because we really want to get like unbiased feedback on this. And in order to do that, there might be negative feedback. So I just try and like work with them the best that I can. I hope that was helpful. Hey, I love this one. How do you build trust with stakeholders who are in sales that may perceive user research as risking a sale? Really great question here. I started by listening in, and I only started by listening in to colleagues who trusted me. So I invited a bunch of salespeople to my research sessions, and the people who actually joined them, they were like, oh, cool, you actually do really interesting stuff and you ask really great questions. How interesting is that? And so because I invited them into what I do, they were like, oh, do you want to listen into some of my calls? And so then I just started listening passively into these calls and noting things down. And then what I did with them is I was like, okay, like, hey, I was wondering if I could just pop in and ask these questions. Here are the questions. What do you think about these questions? Is there anything that we need to change? I would say literally, I don't want to risk anything. From your side, I am here as a guest. Right. So then I would work on them and building a script. And there are some times where they would ask the questions, and then eventually they would get like more and more comfortable with me coming in and asking the questions. So I think it's a lot about like, hey, why don't you come see in what I do? I'm going to listen in. Here are some questions that I have. Let's workshop them together. Maybe you ask them first, and then maybe eventually I can come and ask them. So it's a process, but I would say workshopping these things together and understanding where people are coming from again is really important. And then I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, so what are effective tactics for collecting stakeholder assumptions and reporting them back with supporting or contradicting evidence in a way that avoids triggering defensiveness or conflict? Great to collect stakeholder assumptions. I always remind people that what I am collecting from them are in fact assumptions, that we don't know these things for sure, that they are just things that we think. We don't know them. And so I try and go in and say, hey, I tend to actually hold a workshop with a lot of people in it. So I will hold like a more team-wide workshop because then I'm not like targeting one person. So everybody will kind of write down their assumptions and hypotheses in this workshop. And it won't be like, oh, well, like, you know, Joe wrote this one and, you know, Jean wrote that one. It will be like, okay, like write down everything. And then we cluster the ones that come up the most and we talk through them. And I always say like, I always put the assumptions in what we know we don't know, you know, what we think we don't know, and what we think we know. So 3 kinds of buckets. And then that helps us. So when we come back to it, I can kind of see, oh, well, like we thought we knew this about our users, but we were completely wrong. But since everybody kind of like did it together, it's like a collective, like, oh no, we thought we knew this, but we were actually completely wrong. And it's more of a we rather than like a like pointed towards this one stakeholder who had this assumption. So I would recommend like a workshop setting, and I would delineate it into those 3 buckets. And then for things that we thought we knew that were actually completely wrong, I would then go and just talk through like the evidence of it and say, it doesn't really matter what we assumed. This is what we know now. So don't really focus on, I think sometimes we can focus on like, oh, we thought this and we were wrong and this wasn't actually it. That doesn't actually matter anymore. Yes, of course, it's always important to call out our assumptions and what we thought we knew. But more importantly, what did we find out and what does that imply, right? So like, let's move past the past and like all of those things and like move forward towards, okay, like, yeah, we thought that, but this is actually what we found out. What do we do with it? What does it impact? How can we move forward? How can we drive action on it to make everything better? So really, really focus, making sure you're focusing more on like the results and like the positive impact that that can come from that, rather than like sticking back and saying, well, we thought we knew this, but we were actually really wrong. I hope that that's helpful, just like a bit of a reframe. Great. We are over 1 minute, but really quickly, where there's a bit of like building trust. So building trust in results or building trust with a PM who is a contractor. What I would say with anything with building trust, think about how you would like somebody to build trust with you if you were in that situation. So if you're trying to build trust with somebody, think about like, okay, like if people didn't trust me, or if I didn't feel or I felt uneasy, like what would I want somebody to ask me? What would I want somebody to talk to me about? How would I want somebody to approach me? Because this is the same as like when we build trust with our participants. We have to go in and we have to ask about them. We have to care about them. We have to sympathize and empathize with them and their fears and their unmet needs and their pain points and their goals that they're not reaching and that they're not achieving. And I would say like that's very similar with that. So like with building trust with like results and stakeholders who are not like involved to day, like try and still understand what they care about and continue to say, hey, like continue to update them. I'm like not a huge proponent of like the big reveal. I hate the big reveal. Don't go away for 6 weeks and then come back with a project. Involve them like as much as you can. So I love Slack messages, Slack updates, things like that, where I'm like constantly updating people on like, hey, this is something that we're like, this is like a finding that is growing. This is a pattern or a theme that's becoming apparent. And it's only 5 out of 12 people have said it so far, but we also have data from like a triangulation always works. We also have a little bit of supporting evidence from data analytics or from customer support, right? So because they're like understand what they're not trusting and try and like use that understanding to then fuel what you're giving them. Same with like the PM who is a contractor, losing their contract on a volatile project. I would just go and say, what is the fear? What is the worry? And how do we work together to solve it? Always like bringing them onto your side, but start always by talking to people, asking people questions, and empathizing with all of the crazy things that humans go through, all of our emotions that we also feel. Our stakeholders are feeling them too. They're not just robots, I promise. And really just start there. And if you have that good intent, it will follow through. So thank you all so much. I'm sorry that we didn't get to every single one of your questions. I always hope that we can, but thank you all so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you all have such a fantastic rest of your day. Keep an eye out for the recording. Keep an eye out for the email about the influence tracker. And I highly recommend giving it a try. Cool. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope that you have such a wonderful rest of your day, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.